Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next Deep Crawl webinar. This week, we're going to be talking about owning enterprise SEO with effective and scalable dashboards. My name's John Myers, and I have the pleasure of looking after our speaker today, who is Mr. Nick Wilsdon of the Vodafone Group, where he is the search product owner. Nick, thanks for taking the time and welcome to the Deep Crawl webinar.
Oh, thanks so much, John. It's really good to be here.
Thank you. I mean, just to give you an idea of the scale of obviously the force that Nick can put behind this topic, I mean, Nick is currently optimizing and owning 22 markets worldwide and effectively 516 million mobile customers for Vodafone. So if this man can't talk about effective SEO and scalability of dashboards, I think nobody can. So it's going to be our usual format. So for our usual guys that tune into this on a monthly basis, we're going to have around about 30 to 40 minutes of presentation. Then we will get into the Q&A. So please do get your questions ready. And don't wait till the end to submit them. Please submit them via the chat box that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen as we go. We love to collect those questions up so we can collate them and get them ready for when Nick finishes his presentation. I'm absolutely certain that this subject's going to cause an amazing amount of Q&A. So very much looking forward to that bit. As always, we will be recording the webinar. We do a full recap onto the DC blog by tomorrow, as you guys know, with a recording of the session, so you guys will be able to listen back to it and obviously get your hands on the slides and go through everything that you need to see on the topic today. Also, we love feedback. Please take the time to fill in the short survey when you guys log out at the end of this next hour. It'll only take you a few seconds. Please just let us know if we could do anything better, suggest some new topics. Let us know if anything, all about what we do from a webinar point of view can change in any way. So please do take that time. So this topic is a really interesting topic for you guys working in the SEO markets today, because it is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And obviously what we want to do as SEOs is be able to visualize performance. And this is what today is all about. And obviously, we're hardly going to mention the word Excel, which is unheard of in some respects to have that happening when you think back a couple of years and the amount of reporting and things that were done via Excel. Moving forward, it's going to be around, obviously, a big segment of this is about Google Data Studio. And I'm very much looking forward to this because I want to understand more about how we can scale and be effective in that as well as a business. So without further ado, I want to hand over to our presentation today and Mr. Nick Wilsdon from the Vodafone Group. Over to you, Nick, and I'm looking forward to listening in for the next half hour. And please, as I say, submit those questions because I'm sure this topic from Nick will raise a lot of interesting things for us to discuss later on in this next hour. Over to you, sir, and looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. And it's brilliant to be here. So thanks, everyone, for turning up and listening. Hopefully, it can be useful to you. Now, let me play from the beginning. There you go. Everyone should be able to see that now. Okay. That's fine. Okay. So yeah, as John said, I basically my role at Vodafone is to look after all the markets, all the Vodafone markets. So we have effectively 22 of those internationally, and my job is it's a very strategic SEO job. So the idea is that I have to come up with processes that work and allow us to scale and deliver SEO capability across multiple teams, multiple markets. So this is kind of the approach that we had when we were thinking about reporting and dashboarding. So I really kind of wanted to share my thinking really around this and some of the conclusions that we came to. I mean, really to start with, I had a chat with Sam Marsden at Deep Crawl. I think a lot of you will know him. He's the SEO and content manager over there. And he released this questionnaire back in August for his Brighton SEO talk. And I would have said really, about sort of 6-7 months ago, I was definitely in the first category. I'd never really touched Google Data Studio, and I really thought it was something that was left really for the analytics teams. I thought this was something you needed to be, I'm a geek, but this is something that I thought was extremely geeky. It needed a high level of analytics or programming to get working. And really over that time, I kind of moved from never touched it to Google Data Studio is absolutely brilliant. It's everything to me now. And I can see it being incredibly useful for any SEO team, no matter what the scale, whether you're doing multiple countries, whether you're doing any kind of SEO work. This will become an essential part of our toolkit. And as John said, it kind of moves us away from Excel and gives us something that's altogether much more useful. So the challenges we face, I'll kind of share some of these. This is some of the questions that I had when I was thinking about how we could get our reporting to be more effective. So the first challenge that we had was multiple stakeholders around the business who needed reporting. We have people obviously in the SEO teams who are technical, who need operational reporting. We have team leaders who are running those teams who need to have an idea of what's going on. And then we have senior stakeholders at NOTCO level, which can be everyone up to senior board, and then a group level as well. So the people at group who want to know how SEO is performing across multiple markets. So how do you deliver reporting that works for all these different levels and all these different groups? That was the first challenge I had. The second challenge was standardization, and this is something that every SEO who deals with multiple markets faces on a regular basis. We have markets all around the world. You can see from Egypt, Australia. They're very, very different. They're basically companies in their own right. Malta doesn't do any e-commerce. Qatar is largely a mobile handset market. If you take India, I mean, they're dealing with, they've got post-pay, prepay, so a lot of people are moving to prepay in the Indian market. So all of these different markets have different e-commerce conditions, they have different metrics that they report on, they have different business units, and they often have different stacks, different technology that they're working on. So there's a huge challenge in terms of standardizing the approach to reporting across all these different environments. Nothing is particularly standardized. The third one is automation. When you're dealing with SEO at this scale, you have to automate, and this is something I learned very early on, because if even the most small manual task, when you're repeating it at that kind of scale, or repeating it for 21, 22 markets, becomes a massive chore, and you suddenly find that all your time is taken up dealing with reporting, and your SEO effort, your SEO resource is just spent entirely on reporting. So you really have to find something that is automated, and if it's not automated, you just can't scale up your efforts across the number of sites that we deal with in a SEO situation like this. So we need something that was fully automated, or as automated as possible, really. And the fourth challenge, budget, and I think this is one that everyone kind of relate to. You haven't got an infinite amount of money. People want to know that the money you're spending is spent efficiently. Some of the tool sets become very expensive. There are layers of enterprise level tools that are exceedingly expensive now. So how can we best spend our budget to get the most effect? And that was the next challenge. And the final one is that analytics and data teams seem to be busier than ever. Everyone wants data and everyone wants analytics. We've had dashboarding before. It wasn't the first time that we've had dashboarding across the business. Work has been done in Quick, in Tableau, in other platforms, but it's very hard to get time with these teams to develop metrics for SEO, and especially the kind of custom metrics that SEO teams need. They're working largely on top level dashboards, top level reporting. So how could we get the expertise that we needed to really get the reporting working for the SEO teams? So what did we do? That's the next question. Well, we looked at data pipelining, which I think is going to be the term that we all start speaking about for the next few years. And the idea is that we take data from various sources, and here we've got Adobe, Google Ads, Google Analytics, DeepCrawl, of course, with their API, Systrix, Google Search Console. We take this data and we push it into a visualization layer. So we don't use the tools themselves, we visualize it in Data Studio. And equally, I've got some people using Power BI for this kind of activity, but for the purposes of our work here, we were concentrating on Google Data Studio. So Google Data Studio, I mean, how's it working? And this can be a very quick overview. Largely data is held in a repository, so you have your data source, Search Console, Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, and then you have a connector, and then there's many pre-made connectors or community connectors out there to pull this data into components that are used in the reporting. And then these components and this can be reused, shared, and you can share access to these. So Google Data Studio is a visualization layer, and that's really important to understand when you're thinking about how it could use it in your organization. So the first data set that you really want to work with is Google Search Console. Why Google Search Console first? Well, it's free, it's easily accessible, It's got a very, well, relatively poor native UI, so you get a lot more value out of it when you pull the data into another platform, and you get to manipulate it and get a lot more understanding from it. And also, there's a new policy in place to allow you to authorize on a domain level. So you can add a text record, and you can authorize all, verify all subdomains now and in the future, and that makes the verification process a lot easier than it used to be. So thanks for Google for that. So Google Search Console is the obvious one to start with. Now, Sam Marsden wrote a brilliant article for Search Engine Journal, so I'd really recommend you go and have a look at that, and I've given you the URL up there, the bit.ly URL. So he looked at Google Search Console, and he saw, well, what's kind of data that you can pull out and you can visualize. So he's given us some really good examples here. First, we can see kind of monthly trending. We can see impressions, clicks, click-throughs. We can see the top performing pages in search. We can see the top performing queries. That's incredibly useful data. This can help us kind of optimize content. We can find out which content's really working for us and what we need to create more of. We can check our biggest wins, biggest losses across the site in terms of impressions and clicks. We can then filter performance. So you can only do this on the API to see branded and non-branded search terms. It's when you actually start working with Google Search Console, you'll realize that there is a community connector for Google Search for the Search Console, and that allows you to immediately pull data through. It takes you a couple of minutes and you've already got data there, so that's very easy. But when you can connect to the API, and you'll do that either by actually getting that programmed or using some supermetrics is brilliant for that. It literally pulled the data through into Google Search Console and allow you to do these more advanced queries. So branded search performance is really useful. That's one that a lot of us would like to see. And directory level, so understanding which directories are creating impressions, which directories are working for us across the site. So these are all really interesting views. And then he starts to look at kind of actionable data. So here we've got Fraggles, and these are Fraggles that he's now getting impressions for across the site, and you can measure these and check your Fraggle performance. So this is kind of the first thing you do. You get that data through from Google Search Console, and that's a really good place to start. And that's something that really you could do immediately. You don't need a programmer for that. And I can't emphasize how easy that is actually to do. So if any of you haven't done it yet, go and have a go. This is something that you should do in an hour or so. You'll then find that you can move on. You can get a bit more advanced, and you do this by blending together data sources. You can blend up to 7 sources of data to get some more advanced insight. And then you can start to bring in other tools. SEO Monitor is quite handy. They provide an API that connects again by a community connector into Google Data Studio. And that again is something that's very easy to set up. They've got a post on that. So it's not something that you need a programmer for. It's something you can literally do yourself. This is very, very easy. And you'll find that you can also get around some of the limitations in terms of connecting, for example, Adobe data into Google Data Studio, because you can use SEO Monitor to pull that data into that tool and then pull it from SEO Monitor into your reports in Data Studio. So you can find these kind of workarounds which are really handy, and that'll enable you to go quite a long way before you need to start thinking about getting a program on board and getting more advanced. But when we did that, we had to think, what was the structure and the strategy behind our use of Data Studio, because we couldn't just come out with some pretty graphs and a bit of Search Console data. We had to come up with a strategy around that and how we're going to present it to the business and how we're going to get markets and opcos to get on board with this program to bring this data out. So we looked at reporting sections across the pages within the Data Studio screens, and we divided those down into performance, planning, control, and action. And these were the 4 very distinct pillars. And I'll take you through what those pillars are used for. I think it will become a lot clearer. So the ambition for reporting KPIs, this is where we wanted to be, was traffic, orders, revenue, CPA. These are really kind of top level commercial goals for the business. But unfortunately, the reality is, and I think a lot of you will know this when you work with varied teams in different markets, that the reality is often a little less commercially set than that, and it's sometimes it's more around traffic and visits and orders. Well, sometimes orders, but rankings especially. So there's sometimes a bit of discrepancy between where we want to be on commercial goals and where we actually are. So we had to think, how could we fit this into our reporting structure that I've just outlined, but then still make it useful to the teams right now? Because if it wasn't useful to the teams right now, they weren't going to use the reports that we came up with, and then you wouldn't get any adoption for the program, and it would fail quite quickly. So we kind of saw how we could fit these KPIs into our reporting structure, but still have a better aspiration for more robust commercial KPIs. So we looked at the 4 pillars here, and the first one was performance. Now, you'll recognize a lot of these kind of commercial KPIs. I mean, obviously you've got traffic in there because a lot of markets are reporting on traffic, but we want to get it a lot more robust, a lot more higher. So we want to be looking at activations, revenue, sales, CPA, ROAS, digital TMPS. These are much higher KPIs that the commercial team really respect. And when you have a report that's visible by senior stakeholders, you need to be speaking their language. So this was what was so important about having the performance section. So this section was exclusively for those very senior stakeholders, and we marked it with an icon, this icon on the top right that you can see, and that allowed them to know what was directly relevant to them. Largely this involved lag metrics. I don't know how many of you know about lag and lead metrics. This is quite a useful concept that I found in analytics. If you're thinking about losing weight, well, actually, I'll give you a different example. So a lead metric would be something that is fairly difficult to measure, but actually directs the activity in a better way. It's something that can actually be much more effective on what you're trying to change. A lag metric will be something that's relatively easy to measure, but will have little effect on what you want to change. So if you imagine you're trying to lose weight, then a lag metric might be your weight in kilograms, which isn't terribly useful. A lead metric, like the number of calories you're actually intaking, would be far more useful. And again, another example, if you're thinking about accidents on a work site, then a lag metric may be the number of accidents that you've had over the last month, but a lead metric might be the number of employees who are actually wearing hard hats. So you can see that the lead metrics are far more useful in actually making action. So on your performance dashboard, you're going to have largely lag metrics for the senior stakeholders, but they're going to be the ones they want to see because they want to align to their commercial objectives. So this part of the report is your prime real estate, and that's really important. You've got a couple of pages, and you've got to really make that space count. And you can see it here. I've got an example here, and you can kind of see at the top there that we actually changed and we created buttons. So we turned dashboards into an application. So you had the icon on the top right for performance. That clearly indicated to the senior stakeholders that that view and that page and that report was for them. But we had links that allowed you to click through the report. This is something that we found incredibly useful. Within Data Studio, you can make a button a report level, and that allows you to effectively use templates through your reports. So you can create an infinite number of pages for these 4 core sections, but also for products and for separate sub-pages. So you're basically turning a report, a single dashboard, into an application. And that allowed us to have effectively an infinite amount of space for reporting. They could be as large as we wanted them to be. Then we looked at planning. Planning was very much for the team leaders. And that looked at SEO forecasting, work in progress with a red, amber, green status on it, the SEO development queue, key upcoming events. We even looked at team holidays and that kind of info in this section. And this section was really about working out if we could meet the challenges that we needed to affect those those lead metrics that we'd identify later on in the report. Then we had a control section. This was very important to me strategically, because there are a lot of metrics within SEO that we use that we shouldn't really surface in the business. And we've seen to our cost when we do that, because senior stakeholders can often look at these metrics and it will generate far more questions than actually helps in terms of giving them insight into the activity we're carrying out. A good example of this is rankings. I mean, how many of us are reporting on rankings, but you spend a very long time explaining why your rankings have changed when it's just a fluctuation in Google. This shouldn't really be something that we're reporting on. We should really be focusing on the more robust metrics, the commercial metrics for senior stakeholders. So the idea of the control section is to use an icon that makes it very clear that this is for technical practitioners only, but it allows you to kind of demote certain metrics through the report down a few levels out of visibility from senior stakeholders. But these are still things that, you know, as SEOs, we want to see. We want to see competitor visibility, tool-driven visibility, for example, Systrix visibility. But these aren't things that we want other people to see because they're too easily affected by a set of factors that we don't really want to explain to people who aren't technical practitioners. So this section is incredibly useful in kind of helping you resolve some of the reporting metrics that you shouldn't really be using, and it allows you to make your reporting a lot more robust, because as you develop the more commercial objectives that you have in the performance section, you then demote these other reporting metrics such as ranking down into the control section. And the final section was action, because we actually wanted this to be more than just a reporting mechanism. We actually wanted this to be a tool, because that's just the other side of the coin, isn't it, when you think about data. We use data to fix things as well. We use data to understand, to get insight in order to make an effect on the websites. So there's no reason why reporting couldn't go in that direction as well. So in this section, we'd look at outputs from data sources. We'd have crawl data that we've ingested into the system that we then put onto these pages, and we allow people to, you know, to actually, ironically, download this again in Excel to act upon it. And I'll give you an example of this. But these are the kind of lead metrics. We'd measure the activity on these pieces of work, these things that need to be fixed, to develop our lead metrics. And this is very much for technical practitioners only. I'll give you an example of how this works. So if you look at the action dashboard, again, you could use links through Google Search Console, through Data Studio, to create, again, an infinite number of pages, really. So each one of these pages became a set of metrics and a set of charts and tables that allowed you to have data that could fix certain issues that you had across the site or support certain initiatives that you were carrying out. If we look at page speed, again, we've got the icon on the top and right-hand side in terms of action, and we can see slowest, most visited pages. We see mobile connection speed. We can import the Chrome Experience user report into the section to see where we are against our nearest competitor. So this was all very actionable data, and the reason this became so actionable was because you can literally right-click these charts in Google Data Studio and download it again in CSV format in Excel. So your teams on the ground can then have actionable Excel output that they can work on. So your reporting mechanism effectively becomes an application, your tool application. So what's the next stage? It's taking Google Data Studio to the next level. What do we do next to make this even better? Well, you've understood about data pipelining, so we have all these different sources of data that we can work with, and we're visualizing it. But there's obviously something we're missing there, and the bit we're missing is data storage. It's a much more robust system if we can then take those data sources into some form of data storage, into a database. So why is it good to use data storage? Well, some of the use cases are that it allows you to get over certain restrictions on original sources. So there's 16 months of viewable data in Google Search Console, but if you're storing it, you can store as much data as you want, because a visualization layer is always dependent on the restrictions from the original source. So once you've actually stored the data yourself, you've got out of those restrictions. It allows you to aggregate data from multiple sources, and I know you can blend data in Data Studio, but having your own data storage gives you far more options on that front. You can create custom attribution models and funnels outside the scope of individual data sources, or outside the scope indeed of Data Studio. So it gives you a lot more power, and it allows you to actually develop an SEO data lake, your own source of SEO data that you can then start to find new and unique uses for. And this is where it really gets quite exciting. So how did we deliver on our 5 challenges when we kind of look back at the strategy that we had on this? Well, firstly, I mean, reporting requires multiple stakeholders. Well, the common reporting structure was absolutely key to that. We found that senior stakeholders liked the fact that they knew which screens were applicable to them, and it allowed us to introduce a whole new layer of organisation, really, in the teams in terms of what metrics they wanted to surface at which level of the organisation. So it gave us a lot more structure in terms of what we'd need on our reporting and how it affected the way the teams operated. So that was really useful. And we found even when markets didn't have exactly the same stack, they would still look at this common reporting methodology. And so that gave us a form of standardization. In terms of standardization, well, the internal toolset really helped with that, because we were all kind of working on the same stack. Different markets, even though they want to do their own thing, they want to have their own data sources, they were all working within the same framework. So it really has sort of helped give us more direction, really, in terms of strategy for our reporting. And automation, well, we now have a process in place to drive automation, which is absolutely crucial, because it's very difficult to explain to different parts of the business why their data needs to be pipelined somewhere, and why it needs to be delivered regularly, and why it needs to move out to something that's more manual, say in Excel, to a source of data that can then be pulled into a database and then visualized. So this has really kind of driven automation really across the business in quite a large way. And I'll give you some examples of that. So and budget was spent far more creative and efficiently by this approach, because we started to look at data and tools in a completely different way. I'm actually far more fascinated now by looking at the API and the community connectors that surround a certain SEO tool rather than the tool itself. I don't think the UI is as important. I mean, it's great for teams on our operational level, but what really matters for an SEO tool is the data that they produce and the manipulation of that data and how we can pull that data out. And I really believe that any tool that is putting a walled garden around their data with this going on is making an absolutely crucial mistake. And it is great to see Deepcrawl following this approach, where they actually thought very much data first, how they can allow this data to go into tool sets and be used at enterprise level. And I'd say it's actually reduced costs, because we're not looking at the UI, we're really looking at the data that the tool provides. And without naming names, I think we can all guess who they are, but there are some very expensive enterprise SEO tools out there in the market, and if all you're doing is using them for ranking, you're missing a huge advantage. You're paying a huge amount of money for data that isn't particularly useful. You're paying over the odds for the UI. So once you start thinking in this kind of data first approach, bring it into your own ecosystem, into your own data studio and your own database, Google Cloud and BigQuery, you start to be a lot more rigorous in terms of what data tools are actually providing, what their value is to you. So it does allow you to go and pick up some cheaper tool alternatives because they're giving you the data you need at a far lower cost. And in terms of the analytics and data teams, well, we're following a common pattern now across the business, because they're also data pipelining themselves, so they can relate to what we're doing in the SEO team. So they'd be very happy to help out where they can. But what this approach has done is it's allowed us to have a community-driven data approach. So people who aren't particularly familiar with data analytics have still been able to get various data sources, blend them together, mash them together, and come up with new and interesting charts that we can use. And that's kind of developing a Google Data Studio cookbook that we're using in terms of the different charts that we can create and the insight that we can get from them, and whether that chart is more directed on a performance level to senior stakeholders, or whether it's a control chart, or whether it's an action chart that we can then use to get more insight and effect on the SEO that we're doing, and use it to actually drive behavior. So where do we go next? That's the question. Well, we've got to develop the data ecosystem between the group and the opcos. That's the next thing. We've got an opco level data stack now, but we have to think how we can then pull certain key metrics out to a group level to have more aggregated reporting and aggregated dashboards that we can use to see SEO activity across all markets. So SEO is really becoming a use case now for data pipelining around the organization, so between opcos and group. And the good thing about using Google Cloud and the Google Stack for this is that it's very easy to port data between the two. So you don't need to worry about kind of paying for the data in two separate locations. You can port the data into your group layer. You port the certain metrics from the opco layer into the group layer very effectively. And we're creating more opportunities to get data pipelining and portability working between teams. On the retail side, we've been looking at sharing footfall data, which again has been something we've asked for a very long time, but now we have a structure in place to actually see how we can get it delivered in an automated way. So then that becomes a shared component and shared data that's then used between multiple reports. And equally, we can take some of our data in terms of trends or visibility, and we can share it with other teams. And we're looking at many metrics really across the business in terms of cost per store visit. We're looking at internal search data, pulling that out to the internal search function on the site, which we know sort of 15 to 30% of people use. And Google Ads data. I mean, I know a lot of the teams really struggle, especially on the SEO side in large organizations, to get hold of paid data. And once you have this structure in place, you then have a much stronger argument to have that data being shared with your team, because you have to have the portability of that data to make it useful around the organization. And then finally, we've been looking at kind of advanced data processing. So once you have your data in Google Cloud, there's a lot of opportunities. I mean, we have things in terms of natural language processing to look through keyword phrase data. So we've been looking at this for the internal website search function, and seeing whether we can identify entities and assess product interest or customer sentiment on that data set. And this is tied into Google's translation API, so we can share this insight across local markets as well. So there's some really fun and exciting things you can do with this data once you have it in your data lake. But we've only just begun. I think this is a fascinating area, and it's one that's got the teams really excited. So if you've not done anything yet with this setup, I would really recommend that you go and have a go with it. It's start with Search Console, because it really is an incredibly easy place to start with, and then just start to build it out. And you can really start to own your own application, and you can have an application that works for every market. You don't need to worry about tool coverage. You can have your own application that's working through keyword data on a huge scale, that's working through footfall data. You can create your own custom funnels, conversions, and models with this data that are completely unique from any other tool out there. So I'm not surprised that this is something that people are talking about, and it's going to be something that's going to increase in popularity for the next few years. It's a brilliant area. So yeah, if you've got any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. So thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Fantastic presentation. And yes, we have questions. So I hope you're ready. So as always, great presentation. And thank you very much for taking us through a really good step-by-step guide, and in some respects, a story of how you got to arrive at the point where you are with Vodafone. I mean, it is really interesting to see that 6-7 months ago, you were not even considering Google Data Studio. And now it's really front and center of a lot of the things that you're doing.
Absolutely.
As you mentioned, the Google Data Studio piece, I'm going to open up with a couple of questions that we had around that particular area. And the first question I always like to ask is from the first person that submits. And Ankit Taka has said, Google Data Studio supports limited components from Search Console. Any idea when it will provide us data such as internal links, external links, errors, etc.?
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I mean, John Muir actually asked this the other day. He put this out on Twitter and asked which of these data points actually people wanted to have being pulled through. So a lot of people are responding to him on Twitter. I think we'll see the whole of this broaden out massively in the next few months. So they're definitely working on this area. You're right that the common component within Data Studio is limited for Search Console. That's true. You get a lot more through the API. So if you do want more of that data now, and some of the things that I've mentioned and Sam mentioned in the article, you should use Supermetrics or one of these connectors to use the API, or again, get that API coded yourself into a component. But yeah, I fully expect Google to open that up and bring all that data into Data Studio. If you think about it, Google wants their stack to be adopted. So Search Console data is a really easy place for everyone to start, because it doesn't matter if you're with Adobe or any other competitor. This is Google only data. So if they can get you to bring this into Data Studio, they've already put you on this journey, and it's very likely then you're going to start bringing in other aspects and start to look at ultimately things like Analytics 360, which is where they want you to go.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely, I couldn't agree more. And just following on from that, Simon Vierman just asked the question, do you notice any sampling when pulling in Google Search Console data into Data Studio? And if so, how do you solve that issue of sampled, GSC console data effectively against obviously what you're looking for?
It is, and it's not a replacement for your analytics platform. And again, it's worth noting that the Google Analytics is actually sampled as well. It's it is difficult, and this is why people have always struggled really with Google Search Console data in marrying that up to their analytics solution. They've always been slightly apples and oranges really, but I think the thing is to not have things that directly conflict. And then there's something we've looked at in terms of clicks, looking at traffic versus clicks. I don't think that's a useful view. So we're kind of looking more at the data is very unique to Search Console, and especially around errors and the idea of how Google has indexed the website, or indexation, as Barry would say, which is really the useful bit that we want, and then bring that into the correct bit of the report, into the actionable bit of the report.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't think that's anything new either. I think, when you take Google Analytics versus Google Ads, you tend to never get them marrying up as well. It's just different timestamps that sit within there. So it's a pretty common Google kind of scenario.
It's completely different methodologies, and I think we also have to consider, why they're selling 360, and they weren't going to give everything away with Search Console. But it's about finding the views that are interesting. And for example, one of the ones I used in this deck was an understanding of page load speed and speed of different sections against your impressions in Google. So that's a very useful view, because you can look at different sections that you've improved or you've worked on. You can see how that's given you more impressions. So that's a way of kind of giving a very sort of relatable data mashup.
I agree. And you mentioned just before on Adobe, and I just had a couple of questions in about that as well. And one from Alice Morgan. First of all, she said fantastic presentation. So thank you, Alice. Glad you enjoyed it.
Cheers, Alice.
Can you explain how you can get Adobe Analytics data into GDS?
Yeah. Well, this is something I struggled with. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a programmer, so there are paid solutions out there. Supermetrics can help you do that. There's so many paid solutions out there for this. But I found actually putting it into SEO Monitor was really effective. So SEO Monitor, you can put it into their platform, and then that allows you to pull it out of SEO Monitor very easily on their Data Studio connector. So if you're not a programmer, then you can do the same as me, on the first MVP that we created, and run it through SEO Monitor, which is a very cheap and effective solution to do that.
Perfect.
I hope that helps, Alice.
Well, I think you mentioned it a few times, and I couldn't agree more with you. Supermetrics is very much a way forward of just being able to extract this data in the right way, and as you say, via the API, you get so much more of that data enriching into the platform.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, John. That a lot of these tools are actually pulling in some of this data already. Even with DeepCrawl, you're pulling in Search Console data, you're pulling in analytics data. So you've already got some tools that are already working with that data to provide a different viewpoint already. So if you can't get it in directly, then think about how you can get it in through a third-party tool.
Yeah, I agree, mate. And then just thinking about it, because you're obviously we've talked a lot about the enterprise side of thing, and Erica Barbosa raises a very good question. Actually, it's just at what point do you consider it to be enterprise level? How would you define that? And I know probably there's no right or wrong answer, but it's just
there's no right and wrong answer on that. What is enterprise level? I tried to create a structure that would scale effectively, so that this can scale up for every market, and it allows us to improve the capability of every market. I think enterprise is a sort of very misused word often, so it's kind of what does that really mean? But we were trying to create something that did have a roadmap, have a development roadmap, and could be extended pretty much infinitely, because there's a lot of work going on not only the data sources, but the APIs that are going into that from the various data sets, but also on Data Studio. And as we mentioned on the first question, we're going to see a lot in terms of Google on Search Console, opening that up and making that data portable. So this is a roadmap that's much better than putting everything with a single tool and a single interface. And the limitations for that is, no matter how enterprise you think that SEO tool is, it's probably not serving every single person who wants to have reporting. It's almost impossible, because with different organizations, especially with multinational, very large corporations, they have very different people looking at that reporting. So it's almost an impossible ask, really, to say to an SEO tool that I need to create reporting for every single person within your system. So I think this is a far more flexible approach to solving this. And as I said, I think it can become enterprise because you're pulling the data and you're creating the data lake. And I think that's what allows you to get that scale. And once you start uploading everything, you can base it all on, you've got one of our markets, which is created their data lake and their data approach, putting everything on the URL, and they're just uploading so much information, log file data, CMS data, to really build out a very unique picture of that URL for them.
Yeah.
And this will give us a tool that is pretty much uniquely ours, really. So it'll service the smallest markets, because they've largely had nothing. If you've got markets like Egypt, they've really struggled to get any kind of SEO tool coverage because they're not one of the major markets. So it'll give them a capability that they've never had before. And with the larger markets, they've got the ability to scale up to be something that brings in data from every part of the organization.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point you're making there, because obviously everybody's probably thinking of Vodafone as just this massive, huge corporate entity, which obviously it is, but then there's bigger and smaller markets within that. And the great thing that Data Studio can give you is that ability to share that data with those smaller markets that maybe necessarily didn't have it before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to pick a market like Egypt in particular, because they really, a lot of these markets don't get the coverage that we get in the UK, the US. And Europe. A lot of these markets don't have any tool coverage at all, so they're left with incredibly basic SEO tools. So even having a system that brings in search data from the websites, which is a huge volume for a company like Vodafone, and allows us to analyze that internal search data against paid keyword data, data that's created store visits, that's created call center calls. We can really build out a very useful keyword tool, even for the smallest market that's had nothing before.
Oh, definitely. And just, you mentioned before, you were talking about data lakes, obviously, and stuff like that. Matt Graves just raised one question, just talking about for large enterprises. Do you have a recommendation for storage of data to begin with, and then ultimately, and scaling up from there, kind of thing? And he's also said great presentation, so thanks, Matt.
Oh, thanks, that's really kind. Yeah, this is something we've struggled. Well, we've been debating internally. We have markets that have used AWS, and I think that's a great solution. Obviously, with my leaning towards Google, I've been looking more at BigQuery. You get a terabyte of data with your BigQuery account, and this is something, being Google, we can obviously work with them to deal with lots of markets under the same arrangement. So yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards BigQuery, to be honest, but Google Cloud is looking quite useful. For example, you can put, I appreciate you on the call, John, but you can put a copy of Screaming Frog up into Google Cloud, and you can download this data, the CBS, and you can then have this uploaded into that data lake to kind of bring and make your crawling tool into a far more enterprise solution. Of course, far easier solution would be to use deep crawl, so we'll definitely say that.
Thanks, mate. That's very kind of you. So I've had a few questions in from various people. So Brian O'Shea is one, and Sam Thomas. They're just basically asking the question, where's best to start with something like Data Studio? I mean, are you self-taught? Would you recommend sort of guides or anything like that? And what's the way to start, really?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of material out there. To be honest, I was self-taught. It's far easier than you probably think it is. And I would start with Search Console. So just get a copy of Data Studio up, attach Search Console. You'll get through you'll get through all the various different metrics, and then you can just play with which metrics you can place against which, and how you can kind of slice and dice that and present it. It really is far easier than I think most people think. And if you looked at that first questionnaire that Sam put out, I think the fact that so few people haven't actually tried it is probably because they think it is something that's left for the analytics team. And what we found as a community within Vodafone is that everyone can have a go with it, and they're all actually coming up with they're finding it's very, very accessible. And I think this is really what Google's tried to do. They're trying to make data accessible, because if you can make it accessible, you can make data a useful living thing through the organization. It's not something that we need a data analytics team to spend weeks of work on to develop and to launch. It's something that we can do constant alliterations of tables. So we can introduce a new dimension, it can introduce a new data source, and it's something that's very, very flexible on the go. So yeah, I would just go and have a go. I think you'll find it's far easier than you think it is.
No, I couldn't agree more. I've certainly found it when I started playing with it. It's very intuitive and very easy to play with. Jason McGovern's just kind of stepping on from that again, said great presentation, so thank you, Jason.
Cheers, Jason.
Are there any sort of complete dashboards that can be out there, or you can be shared with us? Sort of sources of
there are a lot of them. I can stick some URLs in for some of the ones I've looked at, and that's obviously a very easy place to start off, because you can look at someone else's dashboard and you can make a copy of it, and then when you copy it over, you just need to literally connect up the same data sources. So when you copy it over, it'll say you need to have a GA account tied into this. Whether it's sort of site version or URL version, you need to have a Google Search Console tied into this, and you can create a replica dashboard, something you've seen in minutes, literally. So that's certainly where I started. I just took a few templates that are out there, and I just replaced the data sources to get an understanding of what those tables were and what those visualizations were. And I think this is what we're going to see a lot of, is people sharing different data visualizations, which is effectively our cookbook. And seeing kind of what's the most useful tables, and a lot of them aren't terribly useful, and this is why I like the idea of lead and lag metrics, because I try and work out is this actually something that is a lead metric? Is it something that we can actually use to affect change, or is it something that's just kind of vaguely interesting? So I think there's a lot of mixes of data you can do, and certainly I would start with some templates. I wish I could show you more of the Vodafone ones, but obviously I was a little bit restricted on that front.
No, but absolutely. Sorry, it's at the end of the day, your business report. So there is the Data Studio gallery, isn't it? I think it's datastudio.gallery.appspot.com. If I remember right, where you can go and basically there's a community on there that just build an incredible amount of different dashboards and then share them. So it's always a good starting point.
Aleda's put some out as well. If you're going to have a look at her Crawling Mondays YouTube series, she's put out some dashboards, and they're very good ones to look at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's she's been building some nice ones recently as well. So then, just thinking about going the other way. One question is, obviously, is about resource in some respects. And Joseph Kamato has just asked, how big was the project team? Are you able to share any of the sorts of key roles to deliver a project like this?
This was done with a very, very small team. I mean, the original MVPs was I did most of them myself, to be honest. It was delivered with a very, very small team. I think we proved that it could be done very quickly. It was something that took a couple of weeks, and it's got to a much more complex level now, but it's only involving 2 different opcos. So we've got about 3 of us working on this at the moment. So it doesn't involve a lot of resource, and I think you could do this in a much more structured way, where you kind of planned it all out and you had a team and you put in briefs, or you can literally kind of build this very organically. And I think we kind of went for the organic one just to prove the value of this. So we decided to launch an MVP, get up a very basic dashboard, created this structure to organize the data that we were putting into it, and then we got to MVP level incredibly quickly. So I don't think you need a very large team for this.
No,
but obviously it's getting more complex.
A lot of people would want to hear, which is great kind of thing, because I guess it's maybe from the outside looking in, it's, you know, maybe there's 50 engineers on this or something like that.
No,
But
Google's given you everything. I mean, Google's literally given you everything. And as you said, John, it's really intuitive to use. And I think a single person in a company could get this done. It wouldn't take more than that. I think you'll obviously, as it gets more developed, it gets trickier. And once we needed to start developing the API connections for some of these data sets, it became a bit trickier. And then building out the actual, you know, data storage layer has become a lot trickier. But getting to that level is something that anyone can do in a business, and they'll have something that's incredibly useful. They'll have their own tool platform effectively for free.
Yeah, and I think the key point is just being able to get that data into Data Studio in the best and most efficient way. And obviously the APIs just allows you to really access everything from that point of view.
And you'll find better ways. Yeah. You'll find better ways to get the data in there as well, because it's an iteration, isn't it? So you know, the first way I got Adobe data in was via SEO Monitor, but then there's obviously, you know, you might want to then bring that in via the API to get you know, a more complex view.
Absolutely agree. And I mean, just a question here from Maria Turbino, who's basically just saying, have you looked at developing a dashboard that ties, you know, the SEO data with PPC data? Because I know you kind of own the whole piece. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is SEO PPC integration in a nutshell. It's having data portability between the two channels and coming up with interesting mashups that allow those teams to learn from each other. So yes, we have been looking at that very actively. There's some very useful stuff going on in terms of omni-channel measurement and understanding what keywords are driving users into stores. And are these keywords related to support queries, or are they related more to purchase queries? You know, so yeah, we're doing a lot of kind of sharing that data between the two teams, and then that will happen through Data Studio. So that'll be the platform which kind of justifies that integration. So yeah, absolutely, I think this drives that.
Fantastic. And then just going to a few questions just to get more back into the SEO weeds in some respects, because we've got a few on that front. Ilias Tech has just said, hi Nick, thanks for the awesome presentation. And quick question from him is, he couldn't find a way to connect two different GA subdomains. So for example, forum.example.com and 3 dubs and a dot example.com into one Google Data Studio report. Have you come across that, or is that something that, you know?
No, you should be able to. You should be able to blend that. Yeah, that should work. As you should be able to blend those two together. I can follow up with you afterwards, Ilias, on that. Otherwise, I mean, I mean that's yeah. I mean, you definitely can blend that though, because something else we were looking at was to see visibility between the HTTPS version of the site and the www non-www version. So you can blend all 4 variants of the URL, and you can look at that via impressions, and you basically get a chart very similar to the Systrix visibility chart, but from Google Search Console, and that allows you to see then, especially over migration, what happens for the visibility of the site. So that's a really good view, and I hope that's a good reason for keeping the individual verifications on Google Search Console. The domain level verification is brilliant, but we haven't quite got that control yet that you have with those separate variations. So I'm sort of 99% sure that you can just blend that together. It is, but I can check up with follow up with you after this.
Fantastic. And then Dan Lewis Calstats, and hopefully we can make Dan's day in some respects here. He's saying, is it possible for me to automate the extraction of standard page performance metrics such as impressions, clicks, CTR, and average position? Says his challenge today is to group individual pages together. This is not a direct relevant, but in an efficient way.
Yeah, absolutely, you can automate that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you get that. Yeah, I mean that's what Data Studio is for. We can absolutely automate that. So that's a definite use case.
And Jack Billamack is saying, have you found helpful naming name clashes for excuse me, for aspects of Data Studio reports? For instance, blended data views named SC to GA, or pages are general view, 404s, impression improvements. How do you break down your reports to allow you to find the information easily?
So I don't quite understand what you're asking. Are you talking about naming?
Yeah, I think what Jack's asking the question is how do you break the data down in order to enable you to just run, query the reports that you build I think my way of looking at that would be it's very easy to build reports that ingest any data from any source and actually overlay them with each other.
Yeah.
I think just to kind of cut through what that may probably the meaning of what Jack's trying to say with that, I think for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, if you can get the data into Data Studio, you can then basically, Jack, you can build reports with any source of data that you want and then overlay those onto the same graphs or into the same tables.
Yes.
Really interrogate the data.
Yeah, and you can segment it. You can use all the various controls in Data Studio. I mean, there's an awful lot of controls in there, and I think we've even only scratched the surface on that. It's a very, very powerful kit. I mean, just to bring your data sets into Data Studio is a massive thing, and you can do an awful lot with that, even before you start thinking about data storage. So that there's a lot of manipulation you can do within Data Studio. So like I said, literally the only limitations are on the data itself and the source of it, because if you have a limitation on how long you can view that for, then you can't keep that forever in your dashboard. But yeah, there's an awful lot of controls there for segmenting and doing, I think, what he wants to do.
No, definitely, I couldn't agree more. I think for me, I found once I had the data in there, I could very easily drag, drop, and build, different templates. That allowed me to kind of just, cut the data in different ways. So
yeah,
very handy.
I'm doing that all the time, and you'll find this when you start pulling in all these data sources, you just have 1,000 different metrics, and especially when you can start blending them together, and you're literally just, I feel like my kids playing Minecraft. Literally just coming up with a load of different recipes of different data sources and putting one against each other and seeing, what chart does it give you, and that's a lot of fun.
No, definitely. Well, we're out of time. I mean, we still have some more questions to go. So I'm like anything, I like to try and get an answer to everything. So we've got a few questions that we couldn't ask. So I think what we'll try and do is get Nick to take a couple of minutes just to throw a little one-liner against each one of those, and then we can get that built into the wrap-up for you guys. So you all get your questions answered, but the hour just flies by. So again, we're out of time. Big thanks to everybody that attended today. And obviously a massive thank you to Mr. Nick Wilsdon of Vodafone. Thanks for taking the time to do this with us, Nick.
That's brilliant. Thanks everyone for listening. It's been really, really fun. Cheers.
Brilliant. And as usual, guys, we will obviously recap the whole of the webinar tomorrow on the Deep Crawl blog. There'll be a full write-up. We'll try and feed some of those questions into that. And obviously, there's a full recording of this, as obviously we record every single one of those, so you guys can go back and listen to it at your leisure, and obviously share it with your teams in the office. Please, please, please do fill in the survey at the end. We do love the feedback. As much as we like getting the questions from you guys, so please tell us if we could improve in any way, if you like the topic, if we could change the topic up in any way, and please suggest some topics for us. And that's kind of happened to announce to you guys our next webinar. The date is still TBC for next month, but we will be talking about the challenges of enterprise SEO, and a great guy, Eli Schwartz from SurveyMonkey, will be joining us to talk us through that whole process as they see it. And I'd just like to say a big thank you from myself as well. This has been the latest Deep Crawl webinar on owning enterprise SEO with effective and scalable dashboards. I hope you guys have enjoyed as much as I have. Thanks again, and I look forward to hearing you on the next one. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Cheers.